Hello Bio! We are starting a new module, most likely our last module for the year, and we are going to be focusing on Module 13, Phylum Chordata. And so, because we have a new module, like we've been doing, there are going to be Quizlet study sets on our Quizlet classroom, like there has been for the past two modules. So you can be studying those vocabulary words. And again, when you are ready, as we have done, you will be taking the test function for Module 13 on Quizlet Classroom, and I will give you your credit for studying the Module 13 vocab. If you have any questions about that, as always, just email me, but I trust that you guys at this point are pros at doing this. All right. So let's just dive in. So Module 13 is Phylum Chordata, and so we've previously been talking about all the invertebrates, and now we're switching gears and we're actually talking about the vertebrates of kingdom Animalia. Okay? And so that's why we've got here, this is one of the cervical vertebrae rotating right here. So, whoop, just kidding. All right, there we go. So, the vertebrates of kingdom Animalia are all found in the one phylum, Phylum Chordata, and they all have some sort of backbone to them. And so not all creatures of Phylum Chordata have an obvious backbone, like you and I might think of one, like what we have, but they have some form. So they either have a vertebrae, which are segments of bone or some other hard substance that are arranged into a backbone, much like our own, or many animals like dogs and such. Or a notochord, which is a rod of a tough, flexible material that runs the length of the creature's body and provides the majority of support, much in the same way that the vertebrae does for us, or for other members of Phylum Chordata. But it's important to note that at some point in development, all members of Phylum Chordata have a notochord. And some, it'll remain a notochord, while for others, it will turn into vertebrae before they're born or they're hatched. And this particular phylum, Phylum Chordata, is so diverse, it's broken into three smaller subphyla, being Urochordata, Cephalochordata, and Vertebrata. So these three different subphyla. All right, so members who belong to Urochordata have a notochord through the larva stage, but then it disappears during the adult stage. Members of Cephalochordata have notochords throughout their entire lifetime, so theirs does not disappear during the adult stage. And members of Vertebrata have a notochord during early development, but it turns into a vertebrae before they are born or hatched. Okay? And now, if you recall, when we talked about invertebrates in the previous modules, we said that invertebrates all had a ventral nerve cord. Well, now that we're talking about vertebrates, all members of Phylum Chordata have a dorsal nerve cord that's located on the top of their bodies. And in all of these members, the vertebrae, if they have them, or the notochord, encases the nerve cord for optimum protection. So you can think about just our own bodies and what you know about our own spine and our own vertebrae, and that your spinal cord runs through that. So you have a dorsal nerve cord, and it runs through that for ultimate protection from the bone. So same deal here. Right, so we're going to start by focusing on subphylum Urochordata, beginning to talk about the sea squirt. So this is one of the organisms we are going to be studying. The sea squirt in the larva stage resembles something like a tadpole, and it contains a dorsal nerve cord and a notochord. It will swim briefly, but then attach itself to the bottom of the sea. And then once it's attached, its development will begin. The nerve cord and the notochord get recycled at this point, once attached, to form new tissues. And organs rotate so that the oral and the atrial openings point upwards. And it basically develops a leathery tunic on the exterior for protection and for support. Sometimes these organisms, sea squirts, are referred to as tunicates because of this leathery tunic. So either term can be used interchangeably, sea squirt or tunicates. And they obtain water by siphoning it into its body through the oral opening and expelling through the atrial opening. And so it feeds on plankton and phytoplankton and zooplankton that are in that water that it's taking in through the siphoning. And I'm going to show you a picture of what one of these organisms looks like in just a moment so you can visualize the two openings of the oral and the atrial ends. But here we go. This is just demonstrating the life cycle from your book of the sea squirt. So as we said, has a notochord and a dorsal nerve cord. And in its larva stage, it resembles a tadpole right up here, but after swimming freely, it will find an object like the surface here to attach to. And all of its organs begin to kind of, move around, metamorphosis happens, and the notochord and the dorsal nerve cord disappear, and the organs find their new positions until we end up with an adult sea squirt that has an oral opening and an atrial opening through which water gets siphoned in and out of. And this is showing you a photo of them, but I actually have a better photo on the next slide. So this is some examples of some sea squirts that you can find in the ocean. Like many of the pictures I put up, I find them to be very beautiful, and it would be pretty cool to actually see some of these, under the water, scuba diving and such. All right. Now we're going to talk about a member of subphylum Cephalochordata, and that is the lancelet, okay, which resembles an eel, and it has a tapered body at both ends. It too possesses a dorsal nerve cord with a notochord, and its sensory organs are much less sophisticated than the majority of the creatures that belong to phylum Chordata. And thus it spends the majority of its time actually buried in the sand. And that's because it needs to hide from predators, and that's how it obtains its food. And it takes in food by filtering out the phytoplankton and zooplankton that are in water, much like, the sea squirt did before. It has cilia inside its mouth that beat and draw in the water. And the water is filtered through a structure called the oral cirri, which cleans and filters out large indigestible debris that's in the water and the sand around the lancelet. And because this is a a creature of Cephalochordata, it retains its notochord throughout its entire lifetime, unlike the sea squirt, which it eventually got rid of. So it retains that. Once it filters, water travels through the pharynx and through slits, which trap the food particles that are in the water and in the sand around the lancelet. And water will flow into an atrial cavity and leave the body through an atriopore. So this is basically its digestive system. Any of the trapped food particles in the silt are sent to the gut for digestion, and anything that gets undigested gets to leave via the anus. So you're pretty familiar with the concept of food in, stuff out at this point. And these particular creatures are commonly found in tropical marine environments. In Asian cultures, it's actually a popular food item to eat, but in the United States, we typically don't. So this is the structure of a lancelet. Okay, you have the oral cirri here, pharynx with the slits. It has a gut and an atrial cavity and an atriopore for which stuff can leave, as well as an anus for any of the undigested food particles from the gut. And it has a dorsal nerve cord and a notochord, which it will retain for its entire life cycle. And this is just what they look like when they're down in the ground in the sand of the ocean floor, if you've never seen one before. All right, and so we're going to wrap this video up with a quick couple fact check questions on the two creatures we have just studied so far. And then we will be done. So, number one, if the sea squirt feeds like a sponge and stays fixed to a surface like a sponge, why isn't it classified in phylum Prophyra from our previous studies? Well, sponges do not have notochords or have protective coverings. And so sponges also lack internal organs and specific entrances for exit of water. Remember that these sponges use collar cells that the water goes in and out of any pore of those collar cells, whereas these two creatures that we've studied, the sea squirt has very specific two openings for which things come in and things come out, as well as the existence of the notochord. Number 2, what structure in the adult sea squirt performs the functions that notochord performs in the larva? So for the sea squirt, it is the tunic, which is a leathery covering that protects and supports the organism. So that is what performs the function of the notochord in the larva stage. And lastly, a dead lancelet is found to have large particles of sand lodged in the silts of its pharynx. What, most likely, was not functioning properly prior to its death? That would be the oral cirri that were not functioning properly. Usually they filter out large chunks, such as waste and debris and sand, so it wouldn't get clogged if those were working properly. But because they weren't, it led to the death. All right, and that's all we're going to do today for the start of Module 13. Don't forget to work on your vocabulary words for this module.